Did I mute myself? It's weird that we're... I feel like we could keep talking, right? As people come in. It feels so silent that I feel so, it feels so silent that I feel like we're going to scare people. Like the silence is making me nervous, but that could just be me.
Yeah, for folks coming into the Zoom room, we're just waiting our few seconds so everyone can gather, and then we'll launch right in.
Okay. So we won't talk.
We can go ahead and get started. I'm Julia, a bookseller at Politics and Prose. We're live with Julia Fine and Lynn Steger Strong discussing The Upstairs House. You can follow the link in the chat to purchase the book directly from us at Politics and Prose. If you have a question for our speakers, use the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to everyone's questions in the last portion of the discussion, though apologies in advance if we run short on time. And before we jump in, we do want to sincerely thank all of you out there for joining us. We are so grateful to our loyal family of customers who keep our business and our spirits afloat. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Julia Fine is the author of the critically acclaimed debut, What Should Be Wild, which was shortlisted for both the Bram Stoker Superior First Novel Award and the Chicago Review of Books Award. She teaches writing in Chicago, where she lives with her husband and children. Fine will be in conversation with Lynn Steger Strong, author of the best-selling novel Want, a book about motherhood, economic anxiety, rage, and the limits of language. As for the book, there's a madwoman upstairs, and only Megan Weiler can see her. In the upstairs house, Meggan is ravaged and sore from giving birth to her first child, mostly raising her newborn alone while her husband travels for work. Physically exhausted and mentally drained, she's also racked with guilt over her unfinished dissertation, a thesis on mid-century children's literature. Enter a new upstairs neighbor, the ghost of quixotic children's book writer Margaret Wise Brown, author of the beloved classic Goodnight Moon, whose existence no one else will acknowledge. It seems Margaret has unfinished business with her former lover, the once famous socialite and actress Michael Strange, and is determined to draw Meggan into the fray. As Michael joins the haunting, Meggan finds herself caught in the wake of a supernatural power struggle, and until she can find a way to quiet these spirits, she and her newborn daughter are in terrible danger. On behalf of Politics and Prose, please join me in welcoming Julia Fine and Lynn Steger Strong. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, you're gonna give us a little snippet.
Yeah,
right?
I think I would start by reading just like a little snippet from the beginning of the book. I'm going to read from chapter 2, which is, the book opens with Meggan, the narrator, having just given birth, and this is her sort of reflecting on before she gave birth. So there's really not a ton that I need to let you know. Thali is her dog, and Ben is her husband, and Clara is her baby. Before the baby was my body getting ready for the baby, a preparation both physical, swollen ankles, leg cramps, nausea, and mental. I worried about everything. What if the fumes from the carpet cleaner in the condo next door came through the vents in our bathroom and poisoned our daughter? What if she was born with some new genetic disorder that they couldn't catch with prenatal tests? What if the dog hated the baby and we had to get rid of the dog? What if the dog attacked the baby while we weren't looking and we had to have the dog put down, and then the neighbors got mad because they all loved Solly and they tried to kick us out of the condo association for being bad parent and bad dog parents, and who would want to live next door to those? They would understand, said Ben, when at 8 months pregnant, I played out this scenario. In the incredibly unlikely event that our dog turns vicious and attacks our newborn, I'm sure that everyone will understand why we have to get rid of her. Solly was splayed out on the floor next to the couch, and he reached down to scratch between her ears. But I don't want to get rid of Solly. Then good thing we don't have to. I feel like you're not taking me seriously. I feel like you're not being serious. My face fell, then softened. Everyone has babies, he said, which wasn't true. People have babies all the time. We're in one of the best cities in the world, and we have the best doctors. There's nothing to worry about. None of this was true. If we had stayed in New York or moved to Paris, maybe then at least some of it would be true. But after 15 years away, we'd moved back to Chicago, 40 minutes from Ben's parents, 25 from mine. What are you so scared of? I don't know. But if I let myself linger, and I tried very hard not to, I did know. What scared me was the being known, the knowing. This baby would forever be bound to me. How would I hide myself from a part of myself? I knew my own mother in ways that I hoped my daughter would never know me. I pitied my own mother and never wanted to be pitied. I'd seen my mother's C-section scars and her sweat stains, knew the smell that she left in the bathroom. I'd heard her ugly laugh and seen her swear at wait staff and watched her cry in the dark at her old kitchen table after spilling her 4th glass of wine. Motherhood was not a role I'd envied. It was not a job I wanted. But I didn't not want it either. I didn't actively push it away. We hadn't been trying for a baby. I could have hidden the news from Ben and handled everything discreetly, but I didn't. There was a piece of myself I wanted to cultivate, a version of myself I wanted to be. I could pack sack lunches and bring Gatorade to soccer practice, make trifold science fair projects and polish tiny toenails. I could set aside the dissertation that had started to bore me. Best of all, I barely had to do anything. I could choose without actively choosing. Here was my body letting us know we could have this thing, this future, if we wanted it. I could make something of myself, a literal second self, a second living, breathing someone who would need me. I supposed it would be nice to be needed. If I went to the clinic, I would bleed. If it was just the pill, just a needle, just a quick anesthetic, I thought I might have done it. But I didn't want to bleed. Bleeding would have been so messy, too obvious a metaphor. I was an academic and I lived in a world of eternal incubation. Always one more semester, one more grant. To bleed would have commemorated finality, an active commitment for which I was not dispositionally prepared. So Clara was born.
I love this. I'm going to warn everyone, and I already warned Julia that I thought that I made a list of notes, but what I actually did was make a bunch of bullet points of why I love this book so much. So what I might just do is sort of repeat those. But Julia, one of my bullet points, or one of the notes I have on the side of my book, is that this book feels structurally feminist. And I think that's connected to what you just read, which is to say that passivity feels so feminine, but also that passivity has a consequence is so alive even in that scene, right? It's like what Meggan doesn't do is just as alive for her as what she does do. And I think maybe that to me is connected to the horror of this book, which is that what's terrifying is not what's happening to Meggan, but that no one notices. And I wonder just sort of, I don't know, if you could think about or talk about, I will also admit, and this is part of the book too, that like, when I see your name on Twitter, I see Fine Julia, and I think Julia's fine, Julia, fine. And this book does this sort of amazing modernist thing with language and anyways, it makes me think about the way women perform fineness and how too, I think that is what this book does so beautifully. I think a less interesting version of this book would be someone being sort of aggressively and outwardly not fine. But what's most terrifying is how she's not fine, but no one notices. But then your name is Fine, and that I love too. So
on purpose.
Yeah. So how does a structurally feminist novel is hard. So how did you let the horror live in the spaces where the horror actually lives instead of maybe the easier spaces that it might have lived in another book?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot, the narrator, her whole personality is sort of based on passivity and inertia and this idea that if she doesn't make a move or she doesn't make a decision, then she can't fail. And she, like, we get a little snip of sort of her family, sort of her parents' marriage and her mother and sort of that, the traditions that she comes from and the way that she has sort of learned to move through the world as a woman, which has not, she hasn't necessarily gotten the best example from her mother. And So I think that was definitely a deliberate thing of sort of how can she, how long can she go before she sort of has to jump, like how long can you sit in this idea of like, a postpartum mood disorder or a haunting or whatever, however you choose to see it, until she is sort of forced to do something. And the structure of the book, like you said, does sort of follow that, like she's at the edge, she's at the edge, she's at the edge. Like when is it going to be too much? And when will the people around her say, hey, something's happening? And it seems like such a common situation for women, especially new mothers, to be in, where there's just this expectation of, oh, you're okay. And even the language that we use to talk about new moms who aren't okay, we say, oh, she has baby blues, and it's so patronizing and so belittling, and it's this attitude of sort of like, let's just buck up and you'll get through it. And, I think that, yeah, I was really interested, and I'm very interested in giving sort of a voice to what I think are really common feelings. Like even if you as a new parent, or even a parent of an older kid, don't necessarily sort of feel the way Meggan feels in terms of sort of the inertia of parenting or the resentment all the time, there are moments where we all feel it. And so it was important to me that this book make a space for that.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I'm thinking of that moment in the book where Annie is Megan's sister. And I also love that this book is so not interested in the men. I mean, Ben is fine, but like, we don't care. But like, insofar as like, there's anyone who we have hope in figuring out what's wrong with Meggan, I'm rooting for Annie. But there's that moment where Annie is like, calls her honey. And Meggan has this great line about like, no one in 15 years has said the word honey. I don't know, that like everyone is infantilizing her regardless of how much she used to trust them. And so I just like think the pervasiveness of this is so well portrayed. I want to sort of bring in, actually, I'm going to bring in my grown-up child, because I was talking to my children about this book because they're my only friends, because I don't leave my house. And I was trying to explain to them, I was preparing as we were doing remote school. And I said, well, the woman's brain is struggling. And then I explained about the ghosts. And my daughter, who's much smarter than I am, said, well, that's not a broken brain. That's brilliant, because she gave herself friends, which is just to say that like the ghosts, Michael and Margaret, I just want to bring them into the conversation because they're so important. And even just Isabel's, my 8-year-old, how is Meggan's sort of, I think we have to call it a pathology. The book is acknowledging it as a pathology, but it is also in the face of what you said, like how pervasive this feeling of isolation and not being seen is. Getting a ghost is kind of brilliant, right? So like how do Michael and Margaret add something to the book, and how did they add something to your life as you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I was just, the second that I figured out that Margaret Wise Brown wasn't sort of the quiet old lady in Goodnight Moon whispering hush, sort of as soon as I had read that book to my son a million times because he wouldn't sleep, and I was trying to give him like a sleep training routine. And so we just read Goodnight Moon over and over. And I was interested in Margaret Wise Brown because of that, because I still liked the book after a million reads. And so I thought, how is this possible that I could have read this book so many times? So I started to read about her, and she was just so different than I had expected. She was a rabbit hunter. She was part of this beagling club. She was bisexual. She died at 42, just all of these, so counter to what I would have expected based on sort of the way that I had read her book. It's not even reading her books. It's just sort of what I had brought to reading her books, because when you revisit them, knowing who she actually was, you see so much more in them, which is another thing that I sort of, one of my goals with this book was for other people then to return to her work. But yeah, so with Margaret and Michael, Michael Strange is the woman who Margaret Wise Brown was in this 10-year relationship with. And I think that I saw them, I knew I wanted to write about them. I knew I wanted to write about sort of the immediate postpartum period and what that was like for so many women, like what I had been through, what my friends had been through, what I wasn't really seeing reflected in literature. And I realized a way to bring them together was to have Meggan, the protagonist, be working on this dissertation. And so like the life that she sort of had to abandon in order to raise her child then comes and haunts her. They follow her. They sort of insert themselves into her new life. And I feel like it took me a while to figure out how to weave the two stories in, because on the one hand, I have this, abusive relationship with the author of Goodnight Moon and her older female lover. And on the other hand, I have a new mom who is really overwhelmed by caring for her baby and herself. And the way that they came together was through sort of the haunting, and the way that her work and the work she had been doing before she had the baby continues to haunt her even after the baby. It's not like, a woman has a baby and then all of a sudden the part of her brain that was sort of like an academic or an intellectual or, career oriented closes off. Like, it's still there. You just can't do it. And so to have Meggan haunted by these two characters, sort of it represents sort of the necessity of closing off that part of her life and the necessity of sort of putting aside that work to raise her child, and how difficult that is and how almost impossible it can be for women.
Yeah. I was thinking when I was reading it, looking at the book again today, that like it really is a story of two sort of sadistic, codependent. Michael and Margaret's love affair is not without its complexities, right? But like it's two sort of codependent, really unhealthy love affairs, right? Mm-hmm. Meggan and Clara and Margaret and Michael, and also the ways that like societally Meggan and Clara's, first of all, like I'm sure someone will write me a note about calling motherhood sadist, like bad.
I already said it. I think
bad girl.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess. Okay. So
abusive. I'm writing about abusive relationships, like a newborn and a mom. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And you'll get. We can both get emails. But what's interesting is that but also Michael and Margaret, they're two women in a relationship. There are all of these sort of societal taboos in both, and yet they also hold thrill inside of them. I mean, again, to come back to a question, I think another thing that this book does really beautifully is show us how everything holds its opposite inside of it too, right? So actually the great horror that Meggan faces at the end is the depth of her love for Clara, right? And I wonder, just that seems like what every writer is trying to do, and yet it's really hard, I think, especially with motherhood, right, where it's all supposed to be this sort of blunt force, yay honey. So how did you think, I mean, even with regard to the end and with regard to you're amping up toward horror, but you're amping up toward love at the same time, how did you navigate that movement?
So I sort of knew I wanted the narrative structure, the chronological structure of the book to be you're going up a hill and all of a sudden you start to get, you go faster and faster and faster. And there was a very clear arc of what this book would look like. And it would be this woman just sort of gradually ramping all the way up until she gets to the top, and then what will happen. And that, I think, is sort of that's sort of a horror structure that we're all pretty familiar with, of, the person moves into the haunted house and it gets progressively scarier and scarier and scarier. And then there's a breaking point, a sort of cathartic, big whatever it is at the end. And so I knew I was interested in that. And I think that sort of because I was writing about postpartum psychosis and mental health, that it lent itself nicely there too. And that worked. But at the same time, because the book begins with the birth of a baby, that's not how babies develop. That's it. There's a reason that we talk about sort of the fourth trimester, which is the first 3 months where the baby is outside of the womb, and it's almost as if the baby is still in the womb, because all they really do is eat and cry and sleep, and maybe they'll start to smile at you, and maybe they'll, they don't do much, they don't give you much, but then you get to a certain point where all of a sudden your baby is more like what we want a baby to be. They start to interact with you, they smile at you in a way where you feel like they see you. It builds, your relationship becomes more than just, you're the caregiver. You start to interact with a little person who, will gradually grow into personhood. And so the fact that, it's not like you stop being exhausted, or the things that are difficult about parenthood, don't just suddenly go away. But I do feel like there is suddenly, a reward and, something you can build a relationship on if you have struggled in those first few months. And so that just sort of built quite nicely into like, okay, so the horror is ramping up, but the baby's personality is also ramping up. And like, how will these things butt against each other? And how will what Meggan is experiencing outwardly relate to this inward feeling of suddenly, appreciating having a baby as more than, what it's been so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about, I mean, even as you describe, because Clara, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but I feel like we get to know Clara more than just her. There's something, just her as a baby. And another thing I think this book is, I mean, sure, we have Meggan and Michael, but Margaret and Michael, but in some ways they are the best ghosts of many ghosts in this novel, because there's also really the haunting of, and I like the mother-daughter relationship that existed between Meggan and her mother, and also even this idea that you just read about, this idea of like she didn't even want to inhabit the space of mother because the person that she'd seen inhabit that space didn't do it in a way that felt enviable. And so I wonder about, so we have these ghosts who, I mean, Michael's a little bit more of a problem than, they have their own personalities, but then there's also these other hauntings in the novel that I think have to do with sort of generational mental health, but also just like the way that these words like mom are so imprinted with our own experiences. Like, how did you think about those as, I mean, I don't know if you thought about them as different types of haunting, but different types of pressures that are placed on Meggan that are as important, if not more, than this like lump of a thing that eats and sleeps and poops.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I see Meggan as, I mean, she has just, not only is she unprepared in the way that I think a lot of us are unprepared with the first baby, where you don't realize like, oh, wait, every 2 hours they eat? Wait, what? Like I'm actually never gonna, so there's all of those things, sort of like just the physical stress and exhaustion and difficulty of caring for a baby, but also emotionally, she's just really unprepared. It fits nicely. I think that she sort of is a historian, because she is very interested in, looking at what has happened in the past and naming it and labeling it and being able to sort of like file it and make it make sense. And her whole life has been about making things make sense and sort of staying within this tight little sort of boundary that she set for herself emotionally. And so it was interesting then to say, okay, what do you do when a person who is pretty repressed and has self-control that seems untenable, what happens when then they have a baby and they're hit with the exhaustion and the frayed nerves and sort of emotional complexity and all that is having a baby. How do you, there's just no way that you're able to then hold on to that, right? Like she necessarily has to let go of some of these ideas about what capital T truth is and what the right way to behave is, and her ability to behave in what she thinks is the right way. And so does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it does. I think, and I find Meggan so fascinating. I think, again, like you did her so well because she is really so together, except she's not, right? Like that dress that she puts on that early, I was just like, dude, and then she puts on makeup and I was like, what are you doing? But like, I understand that that's who Meggan is, which again, I think makes the sort of downfall that much more interesting and complicated and also easier for her to sort of elide people's seeing it for a while longer.
I mean, I also think, and this worked nicely having a ghost too, specifically the ghost of Michael Strange, Michael Strange was her pen name, but it became sort of more than a pen name. She just used that name. She was born Blanche Ulrichs and was this sort of Gilded Age socialite who came from a whole lot of money. Like her sister married some Austrian prince. She just was very, very well connected, very well off. Not necessarily the most talented, but because she sort of decided to adopt this facade of like, I'm an artist, she was able to move through her life with just like, this is the projection of myself that I want. And you read, she has an autobiography that I read, and you read it and you just can feel this sense of like projected self, like so intensely. And so she, fit really nicely with Meggan, who also has this sort of projection of herself that isn't necessarily accurate or healthy. And then when you add in the idea of a ghost, what is a ghost but a projection of the self without a body? And then on top of that, just to add more layers, because why not, a baby who is a blank slate, so that was very interesting to me. And I felt like it was fun to sort of build on that and let Meggan sort of riff on that. There's a lot of riffing in this book.
Yeah, but great riffing. I mean, even what you say, I feel like maybe we'll play with this a little bit more. A baby is a blank slate. And Meggan does so many cool, I mean, this book also does really cool stuff with language, but the word mother is not a blank slate. And I guess, like, to me, one of the tensions is that, like, one of Meggan's projections seems to be to aggressively not be her mother, right? And yet when her child is born, she is a mother. And in a way that kind of also feels like so much of where the tension lives inside of this book is just like, okay, so Meggan is inhabiting a word that is antithetical to everything she's projected herself to be, but also is what now she is. I don't know if that's a question. Do you have an answer to that?
I don't know. I do think this idea of language, it was something a way that I was able to write this character was her interest in language, and she's interested in etymology and interested in sort of taking the more emotionally difficult moments of her life and being able to say, like, let's parse it down to a word. What does this word mean? How do we use this word? And so then, like, mother is the word that she talks about like linguistic development, because this is also a book about Margaret Wise Brown and linguistic development and sort of early childhood education, which is how I think those things fit in. So she talks about the way that, like, a baby's lips form mama and why that's the word, but she never breaks down, like, what does it mean to be a mother? Like, there's sort of always a little sheen of, like, if she looks too closely there, then everything will fall apart even more than it already has,
Yeah. I have a question that might be, you can say there is not, but I have a question because I read you say this and I feel the same way, which is I feel like I didn't know everything that you know about Margaret Wise Brown, but when I read Goodnight Nobody, I was like, I want to talk to Margaret in a way that I don't want to talk to a lot of children's book authors. And I feel like I do actually want to talk. So other examples of this are in Dr. DeSoto. The fox is not just a fox, but he's a well-dressed fox. And to me, that entire book succeeds because that fox is well-dressed and not just like a fox. And I think what's in Caps for Sale, I don't know if I'm just assuming that you have all of my, in Caps for Sale, the reason he stops to take a nap is because he doesn't have enough money for lunch. And it's so deeply, there's all of these, like, to me, there's these moments in the most brilliant children's books where you're like, oh, this is why it's brilliant. Like, this is brilliant. I want to know this person. I want to talk to this person. And again, I wonder if there are moments in your book that feel like your sort of Goodnight Nobody, or your, like, a moments that, like, people might not notice, but feel to you kind of elemental to the project that you were trying to build.
It's a really good question. Let me think. Give me a second.
Yeah. It was not fair.
No, I mean, I'm sure that there are. I think, the one. Are there moments that are, the dissertation, so the book has, like, throughout it, it's not just sort of Meggan's chronological narrative. And we'll see sort of little excerpts of the dissertation that she was working on before she had a baby. And then once the ghosts sort of come in, it sort of shifts gears and we see little sort of snippets of Margaret and Michael's life. And then sort of once things begin to escalate, the two sort of combine together. And I would say that that's there's, like, some footnotes that operate not necessarily the way you would expect footnotes to operate. And to me, that feels like sort of that's the gist of the book there, in a way where it's not, I was hesitant to use them because I feel like people are like, oh, footnotes, gimmick, who do you think you are, David Foster Wallace, but I felt like that was a way to show the tension between these manuscripts, like the book that I'm writing, the thesis Megan's working on, sort of the project of, like, haunting, because what's happening really is, like, her work is becoming haunted by these ghosts. And so to me, those moments where she's working on her dissertation, and not only is her dissertation suddenly really not academic and like not a very good dissertation because she's sort of spinning off the rails, but also there's these moments of like, wait, is there a ghost sort of inserting something in here? That to me sort of is the core of the book, I guess, but there's also a million other things. So I guess it's just one example.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. And I think that is a thing, like if, I teach a lot, right? And like, I feel like a thing that you teach students is to like teach, this is not new. You teach a lot too, like teach the readers the logic of the novel, right? And teach the readers the logic of the character. And I do think that moment where we feel invested in Megan's project in these like weirdly complicated way, right? Like both sort of knowing that it's falling apart, but also like caring about it because we care about Michael and Margaret in this amazing way, and caring and like sort of, I think there's something in that. And there's also this way that like it bleeds really pleasingly, like it all just starts to bleed, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, where are we in the way that I think maybe Megan's brain is too. And I loved that. Again, there was no right answer. I feel like sometimes for writers, there's like that weird, first of all, I feel like children's books have taught me so much as a writer. And I feel like it seems like they've taken you down amazing places, clearly. But there are those little tiny things that feel so key, but then maybe a reader wouldn't understand.
There is actually another, in a sort of like Easter eggy kind of way. So like Meggan, she reaches sort of the top of the hill, psychologically speaking, and a lot of the things that she is thinking about are like directly from Margaret Wise Brown's books. Like I never flat out say like, all of a sudden she's inside of Goodnight Moon. That one actually I kind of do say that. But if you're familiar with Margaret Wise Brown's books or her life, I feel like there are like places throughout where Meggan, it seems like she's sort of going crazy, but really she just is sort of like inhabiting Margaret Wise Brown in a way. Like there's a part where she is talking on the phone to her sister, and her sister's talking about like some guy she's dating. This is fairly early on in the book. And all of a sudden Meggan is like thinking about like dead rabbits. Sort of is like, okay, well, this is kind of weird. But a lot of like that was a deliberate, it wasn't just like, what crazy thing can she be thinking about? It was sort of like, okay, well, like what was Margaret, like how is Margaret sort of starting to seep into her life? And so I think, if you're a curious reader who decides that you want to spend time reading this book again, that's something that you can look for, I guess, as a reader, is like, where are those moments where the books sort of start to bleed from Meggan's consciousness, from Meggan's subconscious, I guess, into her consciousness.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, you should read the book again. But also I feel like there are people, you guys should buy the book if you haven't. There are questions. So I'm going to go to the questions because there are a few, and then I might be selfish later and ask more. So we'll start with what we have. Latoya Wolf asks, I don't know if I'm doing this correctly, but she says it's a selfish question, but no such thing. She says, between books, do you read to decompress? Like, what are your beach reads?
Oh, what are my beach reads? I don't know. I don't feel like I read very widely. And so I don't feel like I necessarily have beach reads, because like the things, I don't know, like what did I read? I took The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, which is like a doorstop novel. I took that to like the pool in Arizona, and I like read, I don't know. So I guess that book I like. In terms of indulgent books, I like a really like chunky, long sort of doorstop novel where I can just be in it forever. So Martin Say's The Mirror Thief, which, Lynn, if you have not read this one.
I haven't read it. I'm going to write it down.
The Mirror Thief.
Email me later.
That was one I will. It's a book that it's like three separate, now I'm just going to talk about Martin's book forever, but it's three separate Venices. It takes place in Venice, Italy, Venice Beach, and the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. And it's just about like, it's about luck and sort of being a mercenary and secrets. And I don't know, it's like a 600-page book, but that's my beach read.
I'm into that. Okay.
Nobody else wants this on the beach, but you might.
No, I'm into it. Yeah. Okay. Beautiful question. Oh, answer. Okay. Miranda Paley says that she is probably unduly influenced from having just finished Amy Gentry's Bad Habits, but curious about if or how your experience in academia influenced how you crafted Meggan as a character, as a student and academic.
So Meggan is based not in any, not like emotionally or in any way, but I have one of my dear friends who I think is here, my friend Allison, who got a PhD in history, and I would talk to her about the PhD program, and it just all sounded so insane, and like her like just what it just is, so this never ending. I was interested in this idea of, yeah, she's here. Hi, Allison. It's just this never ending. There's like one more thing, one more year, one more course you have to teach, one more fellowship you have to get. And then like at the end of it, what do you even really have? Because like society doesn't value like what you've been doing in a way. Like what you have is, you know, like intellectually you have a lot. But in terms of like, you know, like there's no jobs, there's no like, I don't know. It felt very like, well, you're working so hard and it's so rewarding on like an intellectual level, but what else is there? I don't know. So I was really interested in that. And then she also took a look at, I read her dissertation and she took a look at my dissertation to tell me like, is this okay? You know? So yeah, it was not based on really because getting an MFA is not really, I mean, at least my MFA experience wasn't like Meggan's experience. It was much more like open and creative and what are you interested in? Great, go do it. And, you know, scrape together a few jobs on the side so you can focus on this. And there's I don't know. It was not like Meggan's experience, I guess. It was a lot more pleasurable, I think, for me.
Right. This is one of the moments in the night. There are usually a lot where I wish we could go for a drink, because if we could, Allison would be the first person I would buy a drink. But Allison, I owe you a drink. Please know that at some point in the future, I would like to buy you a drink. Mandy Berman, whom I adore very much, has asked a question, and she says, was there one aha moment when you realized you had to write about Margaret Wise Brown? What was it?
Yeah, I think it was actually, I picked up her biography. I must have read it all. It's funny too, because my son was like maybe 7 months old, and so I was still sort of in a fog. And I had gotten the biography, and I think I got the biography before I decided I wanted to write about her. And the second I saw and started reading about this relationship with Michael Strange, who was a very like charismatic and abusive, and you know, I there's a lot to admire about Michael Strange, and there's a lot of sort of trails that she blazed, but she also was like very pompous and not necessarily very good to Margaret. And that relationship was, again, so interesting to me, the ways that they built each other up and tore each other down, and the way that their lives intertwined. And I think as soon as I saw that, and I realized, again, like that moment of like, Margaret is not who I thought she was, and this is a relationship that there's so much to dig into. And maybe if I push really hard, I can compare it to a mother-child relationship. So I think it was sort of finding Michael that led me to seriously say, like, this is something I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, and it feels worth noting, just for the non-parent crowd, that like the children ideally grow out of the codependent, sadistic.
Mandy, I know Mandy's expecting to. Don't worry, it's better.
Yeah. I think we might have lost a question, but Megga, whom we also know and love, Mahamdar, has asked, love hearing you both speak about structure and these craft choices in children's book. I'd love to learn from both of you, what's a craft question that you're mulling over currently? Do you want me to give you I can give her one, I think, because I'm going to answer this other question too, which is, do you have any book recommendations for 7-year-olds? And since I'm closer, I'm going to put them together, which is, Chunzi, there is this book series that I'm reading with my 6 and 8-year-old. The 6-year-old will be 7 soon, called The Penderwicks, which I love, and which the lovely person who sold it to us at McNally Jackson described to me as the Ferrante for children. And Megga, to answer your question, I don't know if this is craft. What I've been thinking about is that they make me cry, which is not a new thing for me, but like it's been so, they're just like deeply good, deeply human books. And I've been thinking a lot about the way sentimentality is like considered bad in like grown-up literature, but how much I feel like I can read it in kid literature, and where is the place for sentiment. How do you do sentiment well, I guess, is the craft question that I'm interested in, and that came from the Penderwicks, which are wonderful, and you should all read them, even the grown-ups. That's mine.
So mine is ridiculous, and if my agent is here, she's gonna bash me over the head. So I've been circling around for like, what, 2 years now, how to write a book that feels like music, or that is structured. Hi, Stephanie. Or that is structured. Like, initially my thought was like, what if it's a book, but it's a Broadway show? And like that I never got off the ground. But now I'm interested in, okay, what about, I'm interested in very interested in Vivaldi right now, and the way that like his music is structured, and how do you write a book that's structured basically the way that like a concerto or like a sort of 18th century music would be structured. 16th. I'm revealing my terrible mind of like the 1700s. What century was that?
It's 18th, right?
Yeah. 18th. Okay, good. But like how you would structure a piece of music where it would go allegro, adagio, sort of like happy, sad, happy, and like I don't know. Can I write a book that feels like that and is that? We'll see.
I love that. I love that.
I don't know.
So I feel like I'm always the agent's worst nightmare, because I'm like, oh, the weird thing, do the weird thing. But I love that.
I can't for the life of me. I said too, after What Should Be Wild, I said, I'm just going to write a straightforward, thank you, Stephanie, a straightforward, she said, yes, you can. I was like, I'm just going to write a straightforward novel where it like takes place in one time period with one narration and I just don't know that I have it in me. I don't know.
No, I can't wait to read the music novel. Actually, but another children's book, The Philharmonic Gets Dressed, is the most perfect book.
That one. Yeah, my son is almost 4, and so I think he gets something different out of it every time. We bought it because I had it growing up, so I got it for him at like 2 years old, when he just, we'd read a word on each page, and now he's into it. But yeah, I love that one.
It's so good. Nicholas Neagle asks, how connected to your characters were you through the process? Did it create an emotional attachment that felt draining?
So I felt like when I started writing this book, when I started writing about motherhood, it wasn't necessarily this book, but I felt I was the first of my very close friends to have a kid. And so I hadn't really talked to anybody about like some of the weird feelings, like an unexpected feelings immediately having a kid. And so when I started writing about them, I sort of was like, well, instead of like, if I'm feeling resentful, what if I write a character who is like resentful times a million? Like how do I put those feelings, what do I do with that? You know what I mean? And how do I make it okay for me to explore those feelings while still parenting my kid, and not, how do I, to explore maternal resentment when you have like a 10-month-old baby is just it's a weird balance. And so I think that I was able then to use Meggan as like a sort of storage space almost for like, if I feel something weird, instead of saying like, oh, how weird that I feel weird, it would be like, okay, well, how can I write about this for this book? So in that sense with her, she feels almost like an evil twin is the wrong word, but like, I don't know. I feel very close to her and very far at once. This is a terrible answer. I do miss Margaret and Michael. I love them so much. I really hope everybody loves them and wants to read more about them. And I feel so protective of them. Like you look at somebody saying like Goodnight Moon is such a stupid book. It doesn't even rhyme. And I just want to fight that person. I just love it and her. So definitely I feel I mean, it's ridiculous because like, who am I to be like Margaret? You know, she would hate, like, I don't think, I think that if she were still alive, this would be a very different situation. But I miss them, and I feel very attached to them.
I think that she would love you, and we're going to add to our list of things to do when we can do them, to find someone to fight on Margaret Wise Brown's behalf.
Well,
I mean,
it's the same thing that I think, I mean, I just wrote an essay about how I read people's mean reviews of my work. But so like, if I read it, I've started to think like, okay, you know what? It's not that, like, not only is it not for you, but like, you were missing something integral about this book. And so if you're upset that she rhymes moon and moon, like, I'm sorry, that's your loss. So.
Yeah. It's so, Goodreads can be helpful sometimes in just making your peace with life. Sam says, I haven't read it yet, but how did having friends with multiple kids before you were at the stage of having two help or feed the postpartum portion of this story, or not at all?
It's funny because I wrote most of this book. So my daughter was born like literally the second, not even kidding, the night after I sent off my final first pass pages for this book. She literally came the next day. So I only had one, and I wrote most of it, like I edited while pregnant, but it was really after my son. I mean, I think that making friends who had kids, of whom I'm pretty sure Sam is one. I think that's the Sam we're talking about. But no, being able to talk to people about how they felt about parenthood, just some of the things that I thought, like, am I a bad mother for feeling this way, or like thinking this way, or for, not wanting to do this anymore? And then you talk to people, and like, literally, like, everybody feels that way. And the closer you get to people who are in it with you, the more you realize just how normal these experiences are. And so part of writing the book, for all of us who had recently had kids and felt like we weren't seeing that experience reflected in a way that felt authentic. So it definitely gave me, it gave my kid like people to play with, because he wasn't just like sitting there while I was writing. No, but also just like talking about what it really feels like to be postpartum, and how it's totally okay if it doesn't feel, good. That's normal. And there shouldn't be a stigma, and we shouldn't feel like embarrassed about having PPD or having postpartum anxiety or having really tough days. Like, I think, I don't know, the more open we can be and the more we can talk about it, the more people who are in it will feel like they're valuable and like seen. And, there's not, especially during a pandemic, it's really, really hard because like you can't do the things you would normally do for new parents. But I think for me, just having someone acknowledge, like, I see you, is so big. And so I hope that that's what this book can do in a very roundabout answer to that question.
Yeah. I just want to add, because it's one of my bullet points, that another thing this book does, I think it portrays motherhood so extraordinarily well and so excitingly, but also it's a thrill to read. And I think that combination of the gift of like, you are seen, but also you need pleasure and enjoyment. And I'm going to give you that too. Because I do think one of the reasons people don't tell people about parenthood is because they don't want to listen or they don't care, right? And yet what you've done here is also magic, because it is just a really pleasurable experience of reading, even as it is terrifying and all of the other things. So just as my other bullet point. Casey Davis asks, what has changed, if anything, with your writing since the start of the pandemic?
It's the time. I really have not. I have two small kids, and neither of them are in school, and we're on top of each other. And I actually felt like with this music book, I sort of had like hit a stride, and I felt like I had some momentum a year ago. And then it slowly faded away. I think that when I do really return, I'm hopeful that after sort of the publicity for the upstairs house begins to die down and things, return to like a bit of a more stable schedule and I get back into a routine, I think that I'll be more appreciative of all of it in a way that we'll all be more appreciative of like how it feels to just like hug a friend, but how it feels to have the time and to be able to sort of sit in this. And I think I realized too how lucky I am to be, and this again is so depressing, to be in a career where I'm not, yes, there's a year of sort of like mental space and work that I've lost because of this pandemic, but there are so many women who have had to step back entirely and it's going to be maybe even impossible to sort of get back in. So I think with my writing, I appreciate more being in a place where like, because of the nature of it, I always knew that I was going to be able to have kids and be a writer in a way that I might not be able to, I don't know, I thought about law school as every writer does. And, that felt like, well, if I want to be with my kids, like how do you balance that? And it felt silly me thought, writing would be a way to do that. But what writing has been and what specifically like being a novelist has allowed me is to take a step back without having to drop out entirely. So I guess that's probably not the answer or the sort of the way that it was going, but I do think it's something that I feel very grateful for that a lot of parents and mothers specifically sort of aren't able to say right now.
Yeah. God. I'm going to ask the other question, but that is another reason we're going to have drinks.
I know, not to depress everybody further.
Do you have, this is a good one. I feel like we're going to come back, and also honesty is important. Do you have favorite haunted or haunted house novels? This is a good closer.
I mean, okay. I love The Haunting of Hill House. Obviously, who doesn't? So my definition of like a ghost story or a haunted house novel isn't necessarily like there's a ghost there. So I think about like Elena Ferrante's Days of Abandonment to me is a haunted house story. She sort of is haunting her own house, but I love that. Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin is sort of a haunted house story, depending on how you read it. Yeah.
Good. Oh, I love that. Okay, we have a little bit of time. I feel like Megan's saying something about Days of Abandonment, and now I feel like, I mean, everyone should read Days of Abandonment, and maybe it's a great, I'm already thinking about how I might teach Days of Abandonment in conversation with your book, because
I found it in grad school. It was in a course on architecture, narrative architecture. I think it was Sasha Hemman taught this class, and he's just brilliant. So, but yeah, teach it. It's such a good book.
Yeah, no, I've actually taught it, but now I want to teach it again with your book. Okay, I want to ask a really silly question, but in the vein of sentiment and in the vein of, I don't know, something. What is making you feel hopeful right now, Julia Fine, who's as fine as can be?
The sun came out for the first time in weeks here. We had sort of the same blizzard / cold front that everybody had, and the sun came out, and that honestly gave me, I know it's fall spring and I know it means very little, but it has put me in a much better headspace. Also, and this is also to be sentimental and sappy, the response that people have been giving this book is just giving me, hope for books like this, that they'll be taken seriously in a way, and like in a way that I think books about women that are so deeply about women and women's experiences have maybe not been taken seriously in the past. And so just the way people have read this and seen what I was trying to do and say and felt like it resonates, gives me a lot of joy.
I love that. That gives me hope too. Someone has asked another question which feels connected to hope and also like a fun thing. I kind of think this is your husband asking this question, because I think that he wants to come on this trip. But the question is, when are you planning on going to Venice to scout for your next book?
Is it my mom? Because I did invite my mother.
This person is anonymous. They're staying anonymous, which is why I thought it was your partner.
You know what? When will any of us be able to go to bed? This is another problem. This is another problem with the book, with this particular idea for book 3, is I was all set and I was like, I'm gonna, we're gonna, maybe book 2 will be a bestseller and I'll spend the money on a trip to, now, who knows? Who knows? Right now I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos of Venice, which is a surprisingly nice way to like do research.
Your husband,
2022? I don't know.
Your husband has outed himself. So anyways, that was a fun. I think that we are out of time. Julia, you've written an extraordinary book, and it's one of the things that's giving me hope right now. So I thank you.
Thank you both. It is an extraordinary book. It's also, as we've mentioned, just so beautiful. Many thanks to you, Julia Fine, Lynn Steger Strong, and our audience out there for chiming in. Your patronage and dedication enable us to bring you this kind of live programming, and we simply wouldn't be able to do it without the book sales to support it. So we hope you'll follow the link in the chat to purchase your copy of The Upstairs House, or you can visit politics-prose.com. And while you're there, we really hope you'll check out our events calendar for all of our updated listings, both for the rest of February and in March. There's a lot going on. We hope you're out there staying safe, staying strong, and of course, staying